Welcome to the Computational Genome Biology YouTube channel. Today, we're examining a secondary medical crisis that surfaces decades after the initial battle, Post-Polio syndrome, or PPS. For survivors of the mid-20th century polio epidemics, the initial childhood infection was just the beginning of a lifelong struggle. Now, after years of neurological stability, many are facing a new onset of disability. The engine behind this decline is a failure of the nervous system's recovery mechanism. Motor neurons that successfully branched out to compensate for childhood damage are now degenerating, unable to keep up with the massive metabolic cost. This cellular exhaustion manifests as a triad of debilitating symptoms: progressive muscle weakness, severe generalized fatigue, and chronic pain that persists even after rest. Yet doctors have lacked a clear roadmap for intervention because historical data on mobility loss has been highly conflicting, with reported rates of decline varying wildly from one study to the next. Without a precise understanding of the disease's timeline, timing major medical treatments becomes a matter of guesswork, leaving patients at risk for sudden, unexpected functional loss. To resolve this ambiguity, researchers conducted a 10-year longitudinal study tracking 66 strictly defined PPS patients. Unlike previous short-term trials, this decade-long window allowed for a rigorous observation of the syndrome's slow progression. The study used the 2-minute walk test as the primary benchmark, recording the exact distance each participant could cover at a comfortable pace. To understand the underlying biology, the team isolated the single most symptomatic quadriceps muscle in each patient for a more granular physiological assessment. Researchers measured mechanical force using a fixed chair dynamometer. This rigid setup ensured they could capture the peak isometric strength of the quadriceps without interference from other muscle groups. The investigation sought to calculate the definitive rate of mobility loss over a decade and to identify baseline prognostic factors that might signal a future physical collapse. By isolating these mechanical failures from the general effects of aging, the study aimed to finally map the true trajectory of the syndrome. When the patients were re-examined after 10 years, their subjective complaints of pain and fatigue were significantly higher, but the objective data at the group level told a different story. This chart represents average walking capacity. Over 10 years, the group's distance declined by a modest 6%. However, this hid a severe physiological reality. Localized quadriceps strength plummeted by a massive 15%. Statistically, this 15% drop in raw muscle power only accounted for 11% of the variance in how the patients actually walked. This gap reveals a significant biological paradox. In post-polio syndrome, raw muscular decay does not translate linearly or proportionally into a loss of practical mobility. This paradox is explained by the concept of the functional threshold. Walking speed is maintained as strength fails until it drops below the minimum force required to support the body's weight. Once crossed, mobility collapses. Patients artificially hold their speed through subconscious compensation, like locking the knee joint during each step to bypass the failing quadriceps. The nervous system may also begin recruiting entirely different muscles in the lower limbs to share the kinetic load. Furthermore, the introduction of assistive devices provides the external support needed to maintain walking capacity even as the underlying biology continues to fail. The body's diverse system of adaptations actively masks the failing biological machinery until those compensations can no longer bear the load. Because of these invisible thresholds, the average 6% decline is a dangerous statistical illusion that hides catastrophic individual variances. When researchers broke down the data, they discovered that 18% of the group suffered a profound, life-altering functional collapse. For this high-risk subgroup, walking distance didn't just dip, it crashed by 27%, mirroring a 28% plunge in their quadriceps strength. Despite checking initial age, strength, and years since infection, researchers found no baseline predictors that could warn which patients would fall into this 18% group. Because PPS is governed by invisible thresholds rather than steady decay, group averages are deceptive, and significant physical danger often lurks behind stable test scores. This creates a significant clinical risk. A single assessment in a doctor's office cannot reveal if a patient is safely above their functional threshold or inches away from a total mobility collapse. The wide variation in how this disease progresses indicates that standardized rehabilitative programs often struggle to address the specific needs of patients on these diverging paths. To manage this uncertainty, the medical approach must shift from static snapshots towards the continuous, real-time tracking of actual physical deterioration. Major interventions, such as the prescription of heavy orthotics or major lifestyle changes, are most effective when timed to a patient's personalized trajectory rather than an arbitrary timeline. Thanks for watching. For more on the research into neuromuscular disease, please like and subscribe to the Computational Genome Biology YouTube channel. Safeguarding a survivor's independence depends on persistent, personalized monitoring that adapts as their functional needs shift.